Hello there, Erin here. Hope you're doing okay. Today I'm looking at The Wasteland again by T.S. Eliot. This is the third part of 4 videos that I want to make about this poem. So if you haven't seen any of the others yet, I'll have them down in the description. But yeah, today I'm looking at part 3 and part 4. So this is the fire sermon and death by water, and they actually flow quite nicely into each other. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. And I'm going to try something a bit different. Instead of just reading the poem and then giving my thoughts afterwards, I thought I'd just kind of pause at a few points during the poem and then talk about what I've just read. So just doing it in little chunks. Yeah, I'll just see how that goes. It's a bit of an experiment. But if I like it, I might try it with the next video as well. So yeah, let's jump into it and see how it goes. So this is part 3, the fire sermon. The river's tent is broken. The last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land, unheard. The nymphs have departed. Sweet Thames runs softly till I end my song. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed, and their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, departed, have left no addresses. By the waters of Leman I sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. But at my back, in a cold blast, I hear the rattle of the bones, and chuckles spread from ear to ear. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank while I was fishing in the dull canal on a winter evening round behind the gas house, musing upon the king, my brother's wreck, and on the king, my father's death before him. White bodies naked on the low damp ground, and bones cast in a little low dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only, year to year. But at my back from time to time I hear the sounds of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet in soda water, et aux cerveaux d'enfants jetant dans la coupole. Twit, 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 jug, 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 so rudely forced to row. Okay, I'll stop there. It's a bit of a weird bit. So we start off with this scene of autumn and of the Thames moving sort of down through the city towards the sea, and we're going to be following the Thames in this section. And really what we have just so far is this kind of sad, melancholic tone, much like the rest of the poem. But yeah, we have these nymphs who have departed, and so there's this kind of longing for a lost age, which again is kind of like the beginning of the poem. And then with this weird twit twit jug jug bit, this is supposed to evoke the nightingale, and we have repeated so rudely forced, which was from the last section from a game of chess when talking about Philomel. So the story from Ovid's Metamorphosis, and so it's another story of many that we're probably going to have about either sexual assault or different kinds of just sort of different kinds of encounters, and this kind of despair or dissatisfaction and those kinds of emotions as well. And so he's kind of connecting these things, and as we go down through the river we're going to be seeing more of these encounters. So I'm going to carry on for a bit now. So, unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter noon, Mr. Eugenides, the Smyrna merchant, unshaven, with a pocket full of currants, CIF London, documents at sight, asked me in demotic French to luncheon at the Cannon Street Hotel followed by a weekend at the Metropole. At the Violet Hour, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi, throbbing, waiting, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breasts, can see at the violet hour, the evening hour that strives homeward and brings the sailor home from the sea. The typist home at tea time clears her breakfast, lights a stove, and lays out food in tins. Out of the window, perilously spread, her drying combinations touched by the sun's last rays. On the divan are piled, at night her bed, stockings, slippers, camisoles and stays. I, Tiresias, old man with wrinkled dugs, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I too awaited the expected guest. He, the young man carbuncular, arrives, a small house agent's clerk, with one bold stare, one of the low on whom assurance sits as a silk hat on a Bradford millionaire. The time is now propitious. As he guesses the meal is ended, she is bored and tired, endeavours to engage her in caresses which still are unreproved if undesired. Flushed and decided, he assaults at once. Exploring hands encounter no defence, his vanity requires no response, and makes a welcome of indifference. And I, Tiresias, have forsuffered all, enacted on this same diurnal bed. I, who have sat by Thebes below the wall and walked among the lowest of the dead, bestows one final patronising kiss, and gropes his way, finding the stairs unlit. She turns and looks a moment in the glass, hardly aware of her departed lover. Her brain allows one half-formed thought to pass. Well, now that's done, and I'm glad it's over. When lovely woman stoops to folly and paces about her room again, alone, she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. Okay, so I'm going to stop there again, I think. So we have this scene of this woman coming home from work, and then this encounter with this man, and she's totally really indifferent to it. But really for me, the one thing that really gets me with this section is the, I suppose just this kind of dehumanizing language, I suppose. We have the human engine. Life is kind of mechanical and meaningless and just kind of moves on to the next thing without any thought or feeling. And then later on, then this is sort of underlined with this woman in her room after the man has left, and she smooths her hair with automatic hand and puts a record on the gramophone. I just think that's so sad and so tragic, and you know, in a way that is Eliot's view of modern life, that we're just kind of moving through it like machines. And again, it kind of reminds me of a bit earlier on in the poem, back in the burial of the dead, and someone said I was neither living nor dead, and here we have sort of echoes of that. So this woman in the scene, she's bored and tired, she's indifferent, and at the end of the encounter, all she can really think is, well, now that's done and I'm glad it's over. So this lack of feeling is just really, really sad, and it's something I'd kind of gone over before when I've read it before with my eyes, and I kind of got that it was you know, quite sad, but really after reading it out, I think it hits home harder for some reason. I don't know why, but there's just something about this that's just so tragic and horrible. But anyway, I'll move on again, because we're nearly at the end of this section. This music crept by me upon the waters. and along the Strand, up Queen Victoria Street. Oh, city, city, I can sometimes hear, beside a public bar in Lower Thames Street, the pleasant whining of a mandolin, and a clatter and a chatter from within, where fishmen lounge at noon, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendour of Ionian white and gold. The river sweats oil and tar, the barges drift with the turning tide, red sails wide to leeward swing on the heavy spar. The barges wash, drifting logs down Greenwich, reach past the Isle of Dogs. Wee la la lea, walla la lea la la. Elizabeth and Leicester beating oars, the stern was formed, a gilded shell, red and gold. The brisk swells rippled both shores, southwest wind carried downstream the peal of bells, white towers. Wee la la lea, walla la lea la la. Trams and dusty trees, Highbury bore me, Richmond and Kew undid me. By Richmond I raised my knees, supine on the floor of a narrow canoe. My feet are at Moorgate, and my heart under my feet. After the event he wept, and promised a new start. I made no comment. What should I resent? On Margate sands I could connect nothing with nothing. The broken fingernails of dirty hands. My people, humble people who expect nothing. La la. To Carthage then I came, burning, 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 burning. O Lord, thou pluckest me out. O Lord, thou pluckest, burning. Okay then, so before I go on to the next part, on to Death by Water, just this little last section of the fire sermon. And so here we have just this little section just moving further down the Thames into the mouth of the Thames. And we again have more just little snippets of encounters. There's a little cheeky mention of Elizabeth and Leicester, which I think is a reference to something by Spencer, and he includes them in a kind of similar kind of cheeky way. But I think really it's this last little section with the trams and dusty trees, kind of from then on, where we have these three separate voices sort of giving us snippets of experience. And much like the rest of these sorts of experiences, they're quite sad, quite, quite indifferent at the same time. And then we finish off with this sort of comparison, I suppose, between St. Augustine and the Buddha, with the Buddha's fire sermon. And I suppose both are there to kind of give you this kind of plea for asceticism, to kind of free yourself from the material world, basically. There's a great sort of ambiguity here, I think, that you're not sure whether it's the burning that this character wants to be plucked out from, that the world feels like this kind of fire and they want to be pulled out, or whether the fire is part of the process, where the burning, maybe you have to burn to get out of it, or maybe it's kind of ironic that the Lord has plucked the person out and they're still burning. So they're the three ways that maybe you could look at it. But I think the emotion there is quite powerful. There's the idea that the world is so much, and you just want to be away from it now. You don't want anything to do with it. I think that's quite a powerful, note to end this section on. And then before I go, there's just Death by Water, the shortest part of the poem. And there are no notes to this, so I think Eliot just wants us to take it as it is. So again, I'll just read the whole thing, and then there might be one or two things I want to say about it. We'll see. So, death by water. Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead, forgot the cry of gulls and the deep sea swell and the profit and loss. A current under sea picked his bones in whispers as he rose and fell. He passed the stages of his age and youth, entering the whirlpool. Gentile or Jew, O you who turn the wheel and look to windward, consider Phlebas, who was once handsome and tall as you. So, yeah, this is one of those sections which is quite hard to make anything of. We're given no real references. I know that this was once a much longer section, and our character Phlebas here was almost this hero, and he had this long adventure that Eliot had written, and it ends with him drowning. And all of that was just cut out, and we just have the end of this big long section that Eliot had written. And it's hard to see really what it is. I suppose in the fire sermon we've had this almost inevitable tide as we've moved down the Thames, and the idea that this is maybe linked to a kind of this kind of indifference of our characters who are just letting themselves being swept away by life. So there's this idea of the human motor, which again is maybe like the tide, that we're just moving through it and have no real sense of agency. And inevitably, if you're being pulled down the river, you're going to end up in the sea. And maybe this was Phlebas's fate. He started upriver and just got flowed down and was drowned in the tides of the sea. Maybe that's one way to look at it. And sometimes I think this is maybe a kind of offering that Phlebas is kind of given up to the sea, so that we can start the next section with a different perspective, potentially. So we can kind of regroup our attentions. But again, I don't really know, and Eliot doesn't really give us any references, any dropping off points here. But I think overall this section, Death by Water, and really the fire sermon as well, might be the part of the poem that sounds the best. It's so musical and lyrical. And there are actually, in the fire sermon, there are a couple of sonnets just kind of thrown in there. You might not notice them, but definitely the beginning section, the river's tent is broken, that whole first stanza there is one sonnet, and then there's a less of a standard sonnet towards the end with these three voices, with the trams and dusty trees all the way through to my people, humble people who expect nothing. So there's another sonnet in there as well, I think. And as well, there's just lots of, sort of nice little rhymes in there. It's kind of reminiscent of some of Eliot's earlier poems, particularly the "Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet in soda water." It's got a similar feeling to his earlier poems like Prufrock and Preludes and stuff like that. But I think really overall, with the fire sermon and with Death by Water, the main thing I take away from it is a really sad sense of inevitability and indifference. So that's at least a bit of my reading. I hope that made some kind of sense. I'm not sure how it went with splitting up the poem. I don't know, I might go back to the old way for the last part. But anyway, I'll leave that there. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you soon for another video. Alright.